Alright, I've gotten some questions about how I make my molds, and I know my mold making method is really unique, so I figured I'd make a video to show you my process. Again, I know my process is weird, I've tried a lot of things and this is what works for me, so I'm not currently looking for suggestions on ways I could change or improve this process. This is just to show you what I do. So first, I start with my master dice. I print my dice in translucent green. I find that using straight clear tends to lead to some wonky results. My D4 is different looking. That's because it is cast, not printed, and you'll see why it's a little different later. Another thing that's important to my process are these custom bases that I've made. I've 3D printed them so that the base is slightly keystoned. That makes it so that the lid locks into the mold. You'll also notice that the pedestals that the dice sits on are angled. That's so that bubbles will flow up to that top part. And if you noticed on my master dice, I have a small hole that I have printed on one corner of each die. So now I'm going to use a very strong double-sided tape and put that down on the pedestal and use flush cutters to trim it to shape. And then I'm going to put my master die on top of the mold, being sure that that hole that is printed into the die is at that lowest point on the pedestal. After all of the dice are taped onto their pedestals, I glue them onto this acrylic base. I used a box generator to generate the files for this base that a friend then laser cut for me. I'll include that link in the description so you can use it for yourself. So this acrylic box that I'm using has been designed exactly to the proportions I want to fit my sets of dice. You'll notice I used 2 D20s in a set. That's because D20s are one of the easiest to screw up, so I put 2 in there just in case. Now I'm going to assemble the box and tape it closed, and just for good measure I'm going to put a ring of hot glue around the bottom just to be sure that no silicone leaks out of the bottom. Now it's time to measure things up. So I use about 300 grams of silicone per mold, mixing up a little bit more for this one because I'm actually pouring more than one mold at the time I was filming this. So stirring it super thoroughly but also quickly, I use Dragonskin 10 Fast, which has a pot life of only 8 minutes. After I get it all mixed up, I pour it into my mold. And then since I work with more than one mold at once, I actually like to add a little bit of color. Sometimes I'll color the whole mold, or sometimes I'll just add a little bit of color on the top or bottom, just so that I can keep track of which mold is which. You can see this mold that I'm pouring as well is entirely purple instead of white with a little bit of purple. Now it's into the pressure pot it goes. I put another one of my tiers on top so that the air coming in doesn't go directly into the silicone and possibly cause it to splash. And then I fill up my pressure pot. I cure my mold somewhere between 50 and 60, which is a little high, but there's no harm in going a little bit higher. Please make sure you check the safety rating on your pressure pot. Some pressure pots can't safely go that high. All right, now it's time to demold for the first time. I'm going to open up my box and I'm going to trim off some of the excess silicone that leaked into those cracks. And then I'm going to go in with a blade and just trim any silicone that seeped under the edges of those pedestals so that I have a nice square opening. And then I'm going to pull off those pedestals. Sometimes the tape comes with it, sometimes the tape sticks to the dice, but I'll just use little tweezers to clean that up. All right, after I've removed the pedestals, I have these little 3D printed sprues that I use, and they go into those little holes. I've 3D printed them so that they are tapered so that I can trim them to better fit in each hole. Sometimes I have to trim a little more to get it to fit snugly. They should fit with no adhesive needed. I just push them in those holes until they stick. Also, these sprues I've printed in such a way so that the lid can come off without having to cut the sprue free from the dice. Now I'm going to spray it liberally with this Ease Release 200. That's so that my lid doesn't fuse to my mold, which would be very sad. When I spray, I like to turn it 90 degrees every time I spray to make sure I get it into all those crevices since my dice are recessed. And then it's time to pour the lid. As I'm pouring, I just make sure that my sprues don't wiggle out of place. Sometimes I'll hold them with a finger, but usually by the time the silicone surrounds them, that's all it takes to make sure that they stay where they're supposed to stay. And then in the background, I'm pouring an entirely yellow mold and adding just a dash of yellow to the top of this one to indicate which one it is. Then we're back into the pressure pot at 50 psi, and now it's time to demold again. I pull up all those sprues out of the holes since they're not actually glued down, and then I'm just gonna clean up some of these edges and pry off the lid. It's looking pretty good. Let me pop out my masters. And here you can see where I do something different with the D4. With my crystal D4 shape, a cap isn't actually the best method. I found sprue is better. So I kind of have a cap sprue hybrid going on with it, where it's in my slab mold, but I cut it free like a sprue mold. So I'm just gonna cut him out, and now he's free and the mold is complete. Really quickly, I'm gonna show you how I pour. So I start by pouring with lid off. Depending on the type, I might fill all the way or I might leave a little bit of space. And then when I put the lid on, I made sure to orient all my dice so that all the holes were in the same direction, so that when I put on my lid, I put it on starting away from the holes, going toward the holes, so that the resin is again pushed toward that highest point. And then if I need to, I just top off those sprues to make sure I have a reservoir. Into the pressure pot it goes, and out comes some void-free, easy cleanup dice. Hope this was helpful. Good luck on your mold making adventures.